When love feels like self-doubt. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm asking for too much. It always starts the same way. With connection, intensity, a sense that someone finally sees you. They say all the right things. They lean in fast, intrigued by your warmth, your openness, your depth. And for a moment, it feels like you've found something rare. But then something shifts. The warmth cools. The replies slow. They pull back, without explanation. You ask a question. They get defensive. You express a need. They go silent. You try to repair. They withdraw further. And suddenly, the person who once adored you now makes you feel like you're too much, too sensitive, too needy, too intense. You didn't change, but the way they respond to you did. And instead of confronting that truth, you turn the doubt inward. You begin to question your own perception. You reread the messages. You analyze your tone. You wonder if maybe you are expecting too much. You start walking on eggshells, not to avoid conflict, but to keep them from disappearing again. This is the psychological trap of the avoidant attachment style. It doesn't wound you with cruelty. It wounds you with inconsistency. And inconsistency breeds confusion. It creates an emotional climate where you're never sure where you stand. So you try harder. You explain more clearly. You tone yourself down. You suppress your needs. And the more you shrink, the more they retreat. What no one tells you is this. Avoidantly attached people don't set out to hurt you. But when your emotional availability touches their deepest fears, they pull away to feel safe. To them, closeness feels like a trap. Your vulnerability feels like pressure. Your emotional truth feels like a demand. So instead of leaning in, they distance. Instead of saying, "This is hard for me," they disappear. And because they won't own their withdrawal, you internalize it. You believe you did something wrong. This is how avoidants make you doubt yourself, without ever raising their voice. It's not loud rejection. It's silent retreat, subtle invalidation, confusing push and pull dynamics that chip away at your self-trust. And worst of all, you begin to believe that real love always feels like uncertainty. You begin to call anxiety chemistry. You start mistaking emotional unavailability for mystery or depth. You confuse your triggered attachment system with passion. But here's the truth. Your need for closeness is not the problem. Your emotional honesty is not too much. Your desire for stability isn't needy. It's human. You're not being unreasonable. You're being ignored. And the reason you feel confused is because someone is treating your emotional needs like a threat instead of meeting them with care. Avoidants don't just avoid closeness. They often avoid accountability, which means instead of saying, "I'm struggling to connect," they say, "You're too much." Instead of, "I feel overwhelmed," they say, "You're pressuring me." And slowly, they recast your healthy emotional expression as the reason for the breakdown. But it's not your emotions that ruin relationships. It's emotional abandonment. If you've ever found yourself apologizing for simply wanting connection, if you've ever felt like the more honest you became, the more love slipped away, if you've ever dimmed your light to keep someone from running, this video is for you. Not to demonize the avoidant, but to deprogram the belief that you are unlovable just because someone else couldn't hold space for your heart. The pain you feel didn't start with them. It started long before. But this dynamic brought it roaring to the surface, not to punish you, but to show you what still needs to heal. Because the truth is, you never asked for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. Why you're drawn to the emotionally unavailable. Your pattern isn't random. It's familiar. You didn't consciously choose this pattern. You didn't wake up and say, "I'd like to fall for someone who makes me feel invisible." But somewhere deep in your nervous system, this dynamic already existed, long before they ever came along. Because we don't bond through logic, we bond through familiarity. And if love, in your early years, felt distant, conditional, unpredictable, then that is the rhythm your heart learned to call home. Maybe you had a parent who was emotionally absent, not cruel, not unloving, just unreachable. They provided, they protected, but they didn't attune. They couldn't meet you at the level of your emotions. So you learned to suppress yours. You became low maintenance, high achieving, emotionally self-sufficient. Not because you were born that way, but because there was no one there to meet your needs if you weren't. So later in life, when you meet someone who feels emotionally unavailable, part of you leans in, not because it feels good, but because it feels familiar. Their silence reminds you of the attention you always hoped for. Their distance reactivates the wound that never got closure. You're not attracted to the pain. You're attracted to the possibility of redeeming it. This is the heartbreak of repetition compulsion. The subconscious belief that if you can, just make this emotionally unavailable person stay, you will finally heal the part of you that felt abandoned before. It's not love. It's longing dressed up as destiny. And it makes you loyal to people who make you doubt your worth. But here's what no one tells you. The reason you chase people who don't choose you is because, long ago, you had to earn your place in someone's heart. Love was not a given. It was a negotiation. So now, when someone gives you unconditional attention, you flinch. You distrust it. You say it's too easy. Because if love comes without suffering, it doesn't feel like something you've earned. It doesn't feel real. This is why emotionally available people can feel boring. Because they don't trigger the wound. They don't activate the anxiety. And if your nervous system is addicted to chaos, peace can feel like a threat. But it's not peace you're afraid of. It's being seen. Because the moment someone gets close enough to really see you, the fear kicks in. What if they see the parts even you couldn't love? What if they leave once they know the truth? So you go back to the avoidant, the one who keeps you chasing, the one who makes you work, the one whose absence protects you from being fully exposed. It hurts, but it feels safe in its own twisted way. Because if they never fully see you, you never have to fully risk being rejected. But let this land gently. The emotionally unavailable aren't safe. They're just predictable. They fit the script you were handed, but not the life you're meant to live. Healing begins the moment you stop chasing closure from the people who reopened your wounds. It begins when you ask not, why won't they stay? But, why do I feel more alive when I'm being abandoned? Because until you answer that, you'll keep rewriting the same love story, with different names, different faces, but the same ending. You are not broken. You are patterned, and patterns can be rewritten. How avoidants project their wounds onto you. It wasn't about you. It was about their fear. They said you were too sensitive, too emotional, too demanding. But did they ever stop to ask what made you feel that way? Or did they simply label your needs as problems, so they wouldn't have to face their own limitations? This is the hidden layer of avoidant dynamics. It's not just distance. It's distortion. When someone is emotionally avoidant, they often don't just withdraw from intimacy. They reshape it in their mind. To justify their withdrawal, they can't tolerate the discomfort of their own vulnerability, so they project it onto you. You become the one who's always emotional. You're the one who's too much. You're clingy, intense, overanalyzing. Not because you are, but because they can't regulate what they feel when you get close. So they offload the emotional burden onto you. Let's be clear. Avoidants often grew up in environments where emotions were unsafe, where love was conditional, where needing someone was a liability. They were taught, explicitly or not, that vulnerability equals weakness, and closeness equals loss of control. So when you show up with open-hearted presence, when you ask for connection, for clarity, for consistency, it doesn't register as healthy. It registers as danger. And rather than sit in that discomfort, they push it away by making you the source of the problem. It sounds like you're reading too much into this. You're being dramatic. I just need space. Why can't you respect that? On the surface, these statements sound logical, but underneath them is fear, not of you, but of being seen. Because when you're emotionally available, you act as a mirror. You reflect back their own avoidance. You shine a light on the emotional world they've long buried. You remind them, just by being real, of everything they've had to suppress to survive. And for someone who's never been taught how to sit with their emotions, this is unbearable. So rather than look inward, they deflect outward. You become the one causing drama. You become the unstable one. You're made to feel ashamed, not for doing anything wrong, but for feeling things too deeply. This is projection, and projection is a survival strategy. It allows someone to keep their inner world untouched. By blaming others for stirring it up, it protects their ego at the cost of your self-esteem. You start to silence yourself. You begin to question your intuition. You tell yourself, maybe I am overthinking this. Maybe if I just gave them more space, they'd come back. Maybe love means being more understanding, more patient, more quiet. But love does not require your silence. It does not demand self-abandonment, and it certainly does not grow in the shadow of blame. Avoidants don't realize this, but when they label your healthy emotions as too much, they're speaking to the child in themselves who was never allowed to feel. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting the part of themselves they never made peace with. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it does explain why you've spent so long trying to earn love from someone who couldn't receive it, because they never learned how. You cannot heal someone's emotional wound by proving you're safe. That's their work. Your work is to stop letting their fear become your reflection. Because the truth is, you didn't overreact. You responded to inconsistency. You didn't pressure them. You reached for connection. You weren't unstable. You were unmet. And that's not a flaw in you. That's a mismatch in readiness. So if you've been doubting yourself, if you've taken on the identity of being too much, just to keep someone emotionally underdeveloped comfortable, let this be the moment. You stop carrying their shame. What they projected onto you was never yours to hold. Reclaiming your self-trust after emotional gaslighting. You were always clear. They just couldn't handle clarity. You may not have called it gaslighting at first, because it wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. They didn't scream. They didn't mock. They just subtly denied your reality. They twisted the narrative, minimized your emotions, made you feel like your pain was a misinterpretation. They never had to say you're crazy. They just made you question yourself enough times that you stopped trusting what you felt. This is emotional gaslighting, and it's one of the most insidious consequences of loving someone who avoids their inner world. Because the avoidant doesn't mean to manipulate. They often truly believe they're being reasonable, but they're operating from an emotional blind spot, where intimacy feels threatening, and closeness must be kept at arm's length. So your natural desire for connection is interpreted as pressure. Your truth becomes confrontation. Your vulnerability becomes too intense. And rather than owning their fear, they rewrite the story to fit their comfort. A story in which you become the unreliable narrator. And if you hear that story enough times, you start to live in it. You question every feeling. You rehearse every conversation. You apologize when you're the one in pain. And slowly, you become afraid to trust your own voice. So how do you begin to reclaim it? How do you come back to the part of you that always knew something felt off, even when no one around you validated it? You start by grieving, not just the person, but the version of you who spent so long trying to make it work. The version who kept trying to explain, who kept making excuses for their behavior, who dimmed herself to stay close to someone emotionally distant. You grieve the years you spent shrinking, the dreams you shelved, the voice you silenced, not because you were weak, but because love felt like something you had to earn. Next, you reconnect with your body, because trauma doesn't just live in memory. It lives in the nervous system. The tightness in your chest when they pulled away, the knot in your stomach when your needs were dismissed, the trembling in your voice when you tried to express yourself, only to be met with silence. Your body remembers. So healing begins when you stop overriding its signals, when you start treating your discomfort as a compass, not a flaw. Every time you felt confused in that relationship, that was your intuition speaking. Every time you walked away from a conversation more anxious than before, that was your clarity being denied. Self-trust doesn't begin with certainty. It begins with listening. Listening when your body says, "This doesn't feel right." Listening when your heart whispers, "You shouldn't have to beg for basic care." And trusting that even if you can't explain it perfectly, your feelings are valid. Then you redefine what love means. Because if your reference point for love is inconsistent, then steadiness might feel suspicious. But love is not chaos. It's not adrenaline. It's not a high followed by a crash. Love is clarity. It's coherence. It's someone looking at you and saying, "I'm here. I'm with you. And your emotions don't scare me." And until you believe you deserve that, you'll keep returning to the ones who don't offer it. So you learn to give it to yourself first. You become the consistent one, the safe one, the one who doesn't abandon herself just to be chosen. You become the voice that says, "I hear you. I see what you're feeling. You're not wrong for wanting more." And in that space, something sacred returns. Your center, your knowing, your peace. The avoidant couldn't offer you emotional safety because they hadn't yet created it within themselves. But you can. You can be the one who shows up, not just for others, but for the little girl in you who kept trying to prove she was worth loving. You don't have to prove it anymore. You already are. What happens when you stop chasing avoidance? You stop begging, and they start noticing. There comes a moment when the old chase just loses its thrill. You don't have the energy to explain yourself again. You're tired of being the emotional translator in someone else's silence. You realize it's not love if you're always the one proving you deserve it. And slowly you stop. You stop overanalyzing their messages. You stop waiting for them to come around. You stop thinking that your love will teach them how to stay. You don't make an announcement. You don't slam the door. You just release. And that's when something strange happens. They notice. Suddenly, they're more attentive. They send a "Hey, just thinking about you" text. They ask if you're okay in ways they never bothered to before. Because avoidants feel the shift. They may not understand it. They may not name it. But on some level, they recognize that the emotional tether they relied on is fraying. Here's what's important to understand. Avoidants don't come back because they've suddenly grown. They come back because your absence unsettles them. Not because they're ready to give you what you needed, but because they miss the comfort of your presence. They miss the safety net they never acknowledged. And if you're not careful, you'll mistake that for healing. You'll think, maybe now they understand. Maybe this time will be different. But most of the time, it isn't. Because until someone does the deep internal work of facing their own emotional wounds, they will always return from a place of fear, not love. They come back because you stopped chasing, not because they started choosing. So the real shift is not when they come back. It's when you no longer want them to, when you no longer need to be needed, when their inconsistency no longer feels like a test you have to pass, when peace feels safer than anxiety. That's when you know you've reclaimed your power. It's subtle, but powerful. You start to recognize red flags without needing to walk into them. You lose interest in dynamics that once felt magnetic. You can sit across from someone emotionally unavailable and feel bored, not triggered, not compelled, just unattached. Because when you stop chasing avoidance, you stop making their wounds your responsibility. And that makes room for something new, something unfamiliar at first, something slow, something safe. It's the kind of connection where your needs don't feel like a burden, where clarity isn't a reward, it's the norm, where love doesn't arrive in extremes. It arrives in consistency, and at first, it might feel strange. You'll catch yourself waiting for the shoe to drop. You'll wonder why they're being so nice. You'll feel the urge to create distance, because calm feels suspicious when you've been raised on storms. But don't run. Stay. Let yourself experience what it feels like to be met. Let your nervous system learn that intimacy and safety can coexist, that you don't have to shrink to be loved, that you don't have to chase to be chosen, that love isn't earned through pain. It's revealed through presence. This is the turning point, where the story no longer ends with heartbreak, but with self-reunion, where you stop doubting your worth and start defending your peace, where you stop being the one who explains, performs, and hopes, and become the one who knows. You didn't lose them because you were too much. You lost them because they were too disconnected to receive what you offered. And that's not your failure. It's your freedom. Because when you stop chasing people who make you feel hard to love, you finally meet the version of yourself who knows she never was.